So I know many were mildly disappointed by the iPad mini 7 for being a minor refresh, but not to worry because the next iPad mini is going to bring some big changes, mainly a new OLED display, but there may be a wait for this. Let's dive in. According to market research firm Omdia, the iPad mini is on track to get OLEDs in 2026 or 2027, and to make things worse for the 120Hz nerds, this apparently is still going to be using 60Hz in 2026 or 2027, and it's also going to be a single stack display. Now for those curious, the iPad Pro right now has a dual stack display that gives you better brightness and also better efficiency, and of course it's had 120Hz for years, and so I know many are going to be bummed out by the fact the iPad mini is getting both a worse OLED and also no 120Hz. Now I will say I am surprised Apple's allegedly using single stack OLEDs with the iPad mini. Back during the rumor cycle for the iPad Pro, one of the biggest reasons Apple wanted to go with a dual stack display in the first place was because they were longer lasting and more durable, which is important for an iPad because many hold on to these for years and years. And so to see Apple compromise on that and use single stack technology for the iPad mini is a little odd. Of course, I'm aware they likely want to differentiate the range, and so giving the mid-range iPads worse OLEDs with lower brightness does make sense, but I do have my concerns about durability, and so hopefully these will be just as long-lasting if the rumors are true. Now the introduction of OLED could bring us other changes, for example a thinner chassis and slimmer bezels. I know the iPad mini is already pretty compact as is, but obviously a lot of the iPad Pro's marketing was focused around how razor thin it was, and people always go gaga for insanely thin products, and so I can see Apple flexing that with a possible OLED iPad mini. Regarding thinner bezels, I'm not sure if they're going to keep the screen size the same at 8.3 inches but reduce the footprint, or retain the same footprint but give us a larger 8.4 inch or 8.5 inch display. I think the latter would make sense considering many are already pretty happy with the current form factor. Anyway, aside from that, it is a bit early to predict other possible upgrades. Of course, we're likely going to get a new chipset inside this, which may be the A19, since in 2026 that will be a year old, just like the A17 Pro in the mini that's launched this year is a year old. And we may get a RAM boost to 12 gigs if Apple Intelligence continues to become a bigger part of iPadOS. New colours can also be expected as always, and I'm hoping they're a lot punchier than the current pale shades. Now since we are a while away from the OLED iPad mini, I would not recommend waiting it out. It's very possible rumours can be wrong, and there is an odd part of this report because Omdia says the iPad mini is going to get OLED before the iPad Air, but that makes no sense because why would the cheaper iPad get the better display first? And also in general, Apple does not really care about the mini as such. We had to wait 3 years just for the mini to get a new chipset, and so we could be waiting another 3 or 4 years for OLED to come down to the mini. So does that mean you should buy the A17 Pro iPad mini that just released if you're in the market for a new small tablet? Honestly, yes, because that is pretty much your only option, and let me dive into my experience with this tablet, and FYI, my facial hair and clothes may change. So I've been using the new iPad mini 7 for a little while, and I'm ready to give you guys my thoughts on this, but if I'm being honest guys, this will mostly be a rehash of my thoughts on the iPad mini 6, since both models are very similar, and I'll get to whether you should buy the older mini 6 or this later in the video. Let me first delve into the things that bothered me with this iPad. The first thing is the fact the bezels are kinda chonky. Now I'm kinda nitpicking at this point because I do usually forget about them when using it, but I do think Apple can afford to make the bezels a little smaller and give us a larger display. Now obviously I don't want the bezels to be razor thin like they are on the iPhone, because bezels ultimately serve a purpose on iPads since you need to place your finger somewhere when using it, but they could be smaller for sure and you would still be able to hold it pretty comfortably with absolutely no issues. The next thing I want to mention, and again very nitpicky, is the lack of a silver color option. I love silver Apple products in general, and so I'm kinda sad you're still only getting Starlight, and to be fair, the colours in general are pretty meh, so I'm hoping the next iPad mini has much brighter colours akin to the iPad 10. And that's it, if I'm being honest. Everything else has been solid with this iPad, and that begins with the design and form factor. So this in every way is basically a smaller iPad Air, so you get the flat edges, which I very much like, and also a minimal camera bump on the back. You also get Touch ID, which I do actually prefer to Face ID because I often accidentally block the Face ID modules when holding the iPad Pro, and so I've always preferred having a Touch ID power button. And this form factor is incredibly comfortable to use. Because it's got a light build, it's easy to walk around the house with this iPad and also use it in bed, and I honestly thought this iPad would be redundant for someone like me with a 14 Pro Max, but no, both can coexist, and the wider panel on this is nicer to use at home. And let's actually talk about the display, because on paper, it it's pretty basic. It's 8.3 inches LCD laminated with an anti-reflective coating. The resolution is 2266 by 1488. There's P3 support, 500 nits of brightness, true tone but no 120Hz, and that basically makes up a pretty average iPad display. But because it's your average iPad display, that kinda means that it does the job for the most part. I really have no complaints. It's ideal for watching content with and browsing the web, and for those wondering if jelly scrolling still an issue, no, I don't pick up on it, and I also do not need 120Hz on this, because I don't care, I'm actually fine with 60Hz. Also because I'm mostly using this indoors, the 500 nits of brightness is actually pretty fine, so I really have nothing to complain about with the display. And yeah, this might come as a surprise because I often see people wanting things like OLED on the iPad mini, and whilst I'm sure that's in the works, and it would be nice, it's also likely going to result in a price increase, and so I'm honestly fine with LCD for the time being. You know what else I would be fine with, guys? If you subscribe to the channel, of course. It's free and would bring you the latest about Apple right to your subscription box, so please consider it. It would be appreciated. Join the Saranbyte gang now. Moving to performance, once again, I have nothing to complain about because it's the A17 Pro with 8 gigs of RAM, which is basically still one of the best iPhone chips on the market, so as one expects, performance is fantastic on this. However, if I'm being honest, guys, I'm not really pushing this iPad. I'm occasionally playing 8-Ball Pool and Subway Surf on this, but I'm mostly using this iPad for Netflix and YouTube, which is light work for the A17 Pro. I've also had no issues with apps staying in the background because 8 gigs is plenty for my use. And clearly they've chucked all this performance for Apple Intelligence, but I don't really care about that. But hey, I'm not going to complain about additional performance. Having this much headroom performance-wise is always fantastic because it means we should get years of support. We generally see around 6 years of iPadOS updates, and so you can use this iPad mini for years. I will mention though, it is kinda sucky we have the performance of the A17 Pro, but just because it's an A series chipset instead of an M series chipset, you don't get the full iPadOS experience. In fact, it's kinda weird they've given this Final Cut support, but not Stage Manager, which if anything would make sense for editing, because I don't think you're gonna be editing directly on the tiny 8.3-inch display. You ideally want to plug this into a monitor, and so of course, having that better external display support Stage Manager offers would be very nice. But unfortunately, that's not here on the iPad mini 7. Let's see if Apple does change their mind regarding this in the near future. But at the same time, you could argue this is not trying to be a computer replacement like the larger iPads. It's just a really good iPad and works better as a companion device to your Mac. And moving to software, I will say iPadOS has been pretty stable on this. I do have some issues with the scaling, but it's not the biggest problem in the world. And I was thinking that maybe multitasking on this iPad would be cramped because of its size, but no, it's completely fine. And I do often use split screen. In fact, because of its size, I do want to mention that I do enjoy writing up quick notes on this. And moving to battery life, I've seen many express that the mini could be a lot better in this aspect, but for my usage, it's been pretty reliable. Apple says you should get 10 hours of usage, and I've definitely been getting close to that with my usage. Now, accessories wise, you do get Apple Pencil Pro support, which means this can be a nice portable sketch pad for those into art. Of course, if you don't want the fancy pencil with the gyroscope, you can settle for the USB-C pencil instead, but Apple does not sell a keyboard for this iPad, which honestly does make sense because it would be way too small and cramped, and again, as I said, this iPad's not trying to be a computer replacement like the larger iPads. Quickly touching on the cameras, the rear 12 megapixel snapper is not too bad if you really want to take photos with this iPad. This even has a flash, which the more expensive iPad Air doesn't for some reason, but I would still use your iPhone as your primary camera because it's still gonna be much better than this. I would only use a camera on this for scanning documents. For video calls, however, this thing is great because you do get center stage, so like other iPads, it will follow you around the room for calls. That's pretty neat, though it is in the same portrait orientation, not in a landscape orientation like the other iPads. I guess Apple assumes most iPad mini users are using this more like a phone, and to be honest, a selfie placement doesn't bother me too much. Coming to the speakers on the mini, I will say I'm a little spoiled by the larger iPads and their much bassier speakers, but to be fair for its size, these are solid, and the same goes for the mics. In fact, here's a sample for you guys. And here's a video mic test for you guys on the iPad mini 7. Let me know how this sounds and looks. Connectivity has been upgraded on the Mini, so you get Wi-Fi 6E, Bluetooth 5.3, and also fast USB-C ports, though I'm not really transferring things that often. But hey, these connectivity improvements are appreciated regardless, and I've had zero issues with Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. So that's basically everything regarding the iPad Mini 7, and it's safe to say that I'm pretty happy with this iPad. And if your sole use for your iPad is to do iPad things on it, you should definitely get this because it's perfect for browsing the web, watching videos, reading books, etc. However, I think the biggest issue for the iPad Mini 7 is that it's very similar to the iPad Mini 6, which can be found for much less considering it came out 3 years ago. You can usually find it for $350 brand new, and it might be available for even less refurbished or used, and so I would seriously consider that if you're not too bothered about missing out on Apple Intelligence, because you're getting the same core experience. But if you do want all the fancy AI features, or just want an iPad that's more future-proof with a new chipset, this is really the only option for a small tablet in general, so yes, it's an easy recommendation, and I'll leave links to buy this below. Anyways, let me know your thoughts in the comments, make sure to like and subscribe for more content like this, and thank you for watching.